theory of inflation, saying that everything suddenly expanded very, very quickly into one uniform universe we observe now in physics. Let's see a very quick expansion, and let's see what Mr. Alan Guth gonna tell us about inflation. Mr. Alan Guth, please explain us what theory inflation is.
Radiation that we see is the same intensity in every direction that we look. The universe is just unbelievably uniform on large scales. And that cannot be understood in the conventional Big Bang picture. But inflation explains it very naturally. You start with a very small universe which becomes uniform before inflation, and then inflation just takes over and magnifies this tiny uniform speck to become large enough to include everything that we observe.
So the moment the inflationary period ended, we were together enough to have produced the uniformity that we see today, and that post-inflation period, everything kind of got disconnected and clumpy and all of that, but the conditions for uniformity were already set in the inflation period.
Absolutely. Right. That's the picture.
Doing all right.
So let's now logically analyze what Mr. Alan Guth told us about the theory of inflation. So basically we got singularity, and then that rapid, very quick expansion from the beginning, which is representing that point, and then very, very quickly in 1 second, which is here, the universe, as Alan Guth said, supposed to make the uniformity which we see today as on a movie presentation. But then suddenly here theoretists says that this very, very hot blob which expanded supposed to cool down and expand. So after the period of inflation, we're supposed to first see the cool down and expansion here from that stage. And then, because then we see perfectly distributed hydrogen on the stage 380,000 years after the Big Bang. The background radiation is the first confirmation that the hydrogen was probably equally distributed in the whole visible universe. So very strange, the first question occurs, how come the first hot blob expanded and cooled down into perfectly spread down universe? And then is another question, how the perfectly distributed gas cloud, actually it's a cloud of the hydrogen, huge cloud of the hydrogen, uniform cloud, as we see on the background radiation, how it creates the divided by space galaxies which are actually running from each other. But that we're gonna discuss that problem, how actually the space occurred. Alan Guth says is the gravity, and gravity is supposed to collapse, Mr. Alan Guth, all the cloud, but suddenly we see expansion. So again, the theory of the Big Bang doesn't explain for us logically the events, how from one cloud to cloud which is supposed to collapse due to gravity, then galaxies which are running away from each other been created. That's a very, very basic question. And then we're gonna see another but contradicted explanation as well of inflation, but because on this model here we're gonna see that actually the size of the universe, this is actual expansion model of Alan Guth, that everything, but that kind of that type of expansion, that type of inflation of Alan Guth's inflation requires, unfortunately, to finish, the inflation must to finish on the stage of the hot, of the cooled down, actually the hydrogen. So inflation must go down to the hydrogen to make it perfectly distributed in the whole space. That actually says that the space, the size of the universe in this model almost not changes, not increases, which is also very strange, because before we were said that the one hot blob began to first inflated, then inflation finished, and then from the hot blob we're supposed to see expansion of the and cool down of the blob, which is supposed to distributed to make a perfect distribution, uniform temperature then of the universe, which Alan Guth is saying with the conventional Big Bang theory we cannot explain it, why everything is uniformly why the universe has the same temperature, why we see such a uniformly distributed distorted matter. So in this case, very strangely, everything is hot but doesn't change the size from the beginning, which we're gonna now discuss. That the first paradox versus the second one. That's the second model of inflation. Here we don't see any increasing of the size from the beginning. Suddenly we can just mathematically, logically we can describe it that this area here can represent just like a one square which didn't expand at all. What we see here on the picture, which gonna explain us the paradoxes of the inflation. On a left side we gonna we have like the first model presented, where the hot blob after inflation 10 to 9 degrees of Kelvin degrees begin to expand and cool down, and suddenly makes perfectly distributed. This makes a perfect distribution of the hydrogen. So the question here to Alan Guth supposed to be, Mr. Alan Guth, then we need another type of inflation basically to explain it, because how come one hot blob which couldn't expand quicker than the light could make a perfect distribution of expand, because the model is saying that the blob is cooling down and expanding. So how come it makes on the sky we're supposed to see, as predicted by Big Bang originally, we're supposed to see the hot blob which is get cooler and cooler, but unfortunately we see the perfect distribution of the hydrogen. So we need another inflation here. And then, even if such a thing, we're gonna say, okay, somehow it happened, but of course it's now contradicted. Then how that perfect, almost perfectly distributed cloud of the hydrogen spread out here could be transformed into the galaxies which are running away from each other. Mr. Alan Guth is saying about the gravity which is supposed to collapse actually everything. Not somehow, because now we got the situation that somehow that hydrogen here the whole universe on the some period on some period of on some stage. It's somehow because it was already cooled down into 6,000. There was like a one consistent cloud of the hydrogen. How that hydrogen actually, we understand that it began to concentrate to create the first stars. Okay, that everybody logically understand that the gravity pulled down everything. But how come, Mr. Alan Guth, now we observe, we see the expansion of that matter, the hydrogen, primal hydrogen, is running away from each other. What caused originally that expansion? That is the question. What separated gas? What kind of force actually separated the gas from each other? Because we know only one force, which is gravity, which is supposed to collapse everything here inside back to the one hot blob actually. But then strangely we observe the expanding universe, expanding galaxies, so that's very, very strange. And then we had like another picture of the Big Bang, and that picture is saying, because the only way to explain the perfect distribution of the hydrogen, which is confirmed in the background radiation, is that the hot blob was actually everywhere here, and then somehow that blob transformed and cooled down into the hydrogen, down from 10 to 9 down to 6,000. Very strange transformation on the one side. But then we can somehow explain why the hydrogen is distributed. But then again the same question, why the cloud of the hydrogen didn't collapse into the one, again consistent, why even if the galaxies were formed here inside, everything's supposed to collapse. It not supposed to expand, it behaves completely different way. And the same story, we got the same questions we can ask about newly born stars in gas nebulas, like for example in the Orion Nebula gas. Why and how the young newly born stars get spread out on such a huge, humongous distances in the universe. And we know also that the older one, the heavier one, are spread out on the much larger regions, areas as well. But the question is, what kind of force is causing that spread out from original cloud, Mr. Alan Guth? That's a very strange and interesting question, because we don't know, but the scientist says, of course, that this is the wind of the photons, but such an explanation that the wind of the suns is spreading away, is stronger than the gravity, which is a very, very funny explanation. So of course, we can explain all that picture logically, how it all transforms, thanks to the cosmic evolution mentioned in the frozen universe theory, where the mass is concentrating, and according to Einstein general relativity, more mass is causing stretching of the space-time, so stretching of the space. So first everything concentrates, and then everything begins to pump the space around, so everything spreads out from each other. And that's as well what's going on in nebulas, but we're gonna make another movie about it, so be ready.